At exactly 7:40 in the morning, my exclusive black card was declined over a $9 birthday muffin. When I called my husband to resolve the issue, he simply laughed through the phone and told me I was spending too much of his money. Then his entitled 16-year-old son chimed in telling me I needed to ask for permission before spending another dime. I did not argue or cry. I hung up the phone, drove straight to my corporate lawyer, and initiated a total financial lockdown. 2 hours later, I had 74 missed calls. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old and self-made. Growing up in the foster care system in DeKalb County taught me how to survive, but marrying into the black elite of Atlanta taught me how to fight. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone of your worth when they tried to treat you like you were beneath them. My husband Julian and his family thought my real estate empire was theirs to control. They were severely mistaken. The absolute humiliation began inside Lumiere, which is the most exclusive artisanal bakery in Buckhead. I had been awake since 6 in the morning, standing in the freezing Atlanta air just to buy Trey his favorite blueberry streusel muffin for his 16th birthday. Trey is my stepson, and I had spent the last 4 years bending over backward to be the perfect stepmother and the flawless wife. I wanted his birthday morning to be special. I stepped up to the marble counter and handed the cashier my heavy metal card. I smiled, anticipating the quick transaction so I could rush back to our sprawling mansion and set up the breakfast table. The cashier swiped the card. A sharp beep echoed from the machine. She frowned and tried inserting the chip. Another rejection beep sounded. "I am sorry, ma'am, but the card is declining," she whispered, giving me a tight and highly uncomfortable smile. Behind me, a line of perfectly manicured women shifted their weight. These were the wives of prominent surgeons and politicians in our social circle. I could practically hear the rustle of their designer bags and their soft, judgmental whispers. Declined over a $9 muffin, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can you run it again, please?" "I tried both methods," Mrs. Vance, the cashier, replied, keeping her voice low since she recognized me. "The terminal says the account is frozen, and you need to contact the primary account holder." My cheeks burned with a sudden intense heat. I dug into my Chanel tote, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and placed it on the counter. "Keep the change," I muttered, grabbing the small pastry box. I walked out of the bakery with my head held high, though my heart was hammering violently against my ribs. Once I was safely inside the driver's seat of my G-Wagon, I pressed the button on my steering wheel to initiate a call. The phone rang 3 times before my husband answered. Julian was a senior investment banker, born into a family that considered themselves Atlanta royalty. His grandfather was a prominent civil rights attorney, and his mother, Beatrice, practically ran every elite country club south of Peachtree Street. They were legacy wealth. I was just a former foster kid who built a commercial real estate development firm from absolutely nothing. "What is it, Maya? I am in the middle of a morning briefing," Julian said, his voice dripping with his usual arrogance. "Julian, did you do something to the joint account?" I asked, trying to keep my breathing steady. I was just humiliated at the bakery trying to buy Trey his birthday muffin. The terminal said the account was frozen by the primary holder. A sharp, cruel laugh echoed through the car speakers. It was not a laugh of surprise. It was a laugh of deep, intentional satisfaction. "I did not freeze it, Maya. I just adjusted your spending limit to 0, Julian replied. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Excuse me," I said. "The majority of the liquidity in that joint account came from the closing of my Midtown Plaza project last week. We are talking about over $2 million of my money. You locked me out of my own money." "It is our money," Maya, Julian corrected, shifting into the condescending, patriarchal tone he used when he wanted to put me in my place. "And lately, you have been spending way too much on your little real estate side hustles. I am the financial expert in this family. I need to manage the cash flow properly. You need to learn how to stick to a strict budget." Before I could formulate a response to the sheer audacity of his words, I heard a second voice on the line. It was Trey. "Tell her, Dad." Trey sneered through the speakerphone. "If you want to spend another dollar of my dad's money, Maya, you need to ask for permission first." especially after you tried to say I could not get the Range Rover for my birthday today. My breath hitched in my throat. A 16-year-old boy was speaking to me like I was a beggar on the street and his father was letting him. No, Julian was not just letting him do it. Julian was actively encouraging it. You hear the birthday boy? Julian chuckled. Just go home, Maya. Bake a cake or something. Act like a traditional wife for once, instead of an aggressive contractor. I will unlock a few $100s for grocery money later this afternoon. The line went dead. I sat in the quiet of my car, staring at the little white pastry box on the passenger seat. Any other woman might have cried. Any other woman might have driven back to that massive mansion, screamed at her husband, and demanded respect. But the foster care system did not teach me how to cry. It taught me how to survive and how to calculate my next move. Julian thought he was teaching me a lesson. He thought that because his name was listed as the primary account holder on that specific legacy banking account, he held all the power. He completely forgot that the only reason his failing investment firm was still afloat was because my commercial properties were quietly acting as his shadow collateral. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my phone, bypassed Julian's contact, and dialed a number I had not used in 2 years. Elias, I said the moment the gruff voice answered the call. Maya, it is 10 minutes to 8 in the morning. Did somebody die or did somebody steal from you? Elias was my corporate attorney and a man who treated legal battles like a blood sport. He never engaged in small talk. Julian just locked me out of the joint account, I said, my voice dangerously calm. The one holding the Midtown Plaza profits. Silence stretched over the line for a few seconds. Then I heard the sound of his heavy leather chair squeaking. Where are you right now? He asked. Sitting outside a bakery with a $9 muffin, I replied. Throw the muffin away and get to my office right now, Elias ordered. I put the car in drive. I did not go home to the ungrateful teenager. I did not go home to the narcissistic husband. I merged onto the highway, feeling the tires of my heavy vehicle gripping the asphalt as I headed straight for downtown Atlanta. Julian wanted to play a game of financial control. He wanted to remind me that I was not born into his elite world and that he viewed me as a highly paid servant rather than an equal partner. He wanted to break my spirit and force me to submit to his authority. But he was about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between our worlds. Legacy wealth is inherited, but self-made wealth is earned through blood and ruthless strategy. Self-made wealth is dangerous because the person who built it knows exactly how to tear an empire down to the studs. As I drove down the interstate, I thought about the past 4 years of my marriage. I had ignored so many red flags. The way his mother Beatrice always made sure to introduce me at charity galas as the poor girl Julian rescued from a rough background. She would sip her expensive champagne and loudly praise her son for his charity work in marrying me. The way his sister Chloe constantly asked me to fund her fake luxury lifestyle, begging for designer bags while secretly mocking my lack of pedigree to her friends. I had endured their relentless microaggressions because I desperately craved a family. Trey was a reflection of this toxicity. I had spent countless evenings helping him with homework, buying him gifts, and trying to be a maternal figure. He repaid my kindness with constant disrespect, mirroring his father's exact attitude. But today, the illusion was shattered. Julian freezing my card was not about a muffin or a birthday budget, it was a calculated power play. He was testing the waters to see if he could completely subjugate me and commandeer the millions I had earned through my own sweat and intellect. He assumed my desire for a family would outweigh my business acumen. The Atlanta skyline loomed ahead of me, gleaming in the early morning sun. Every glass tower and steel structure reminded me of my true strength. I was a builder. I understood foundations, contracts, and leverage. Julian only understood appearances. I pulled into the underground parking garage of Elias's firm, my mind already shifting from wife mode to war mode. The transition was seamless. I left the pastry box sitting on the passenger seat, a forgotten relic of the woman I used to be just an hour ago. When I walked through the glass doors of the law firm, Elias was already waiting for me in the main conference room. His laptop was open and stacks of financial documents were neatly arranged on the mahogany table. He looked up at me, taking in my calm demeanor. "You are not crying," he observed, his tone approving. "Tears are for people who do not have a contingency plan," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "What do we have?" Elias turned his laptop screen toward me. I expected to see a simple account freeze, but what I saw made my blood run ice cold. Julian did not just lock the card. He had been very busy while I was sleeping. This was not a spontaneous punishment over a birthday car. This was a premeditated financial ambush, and I had walked right into it. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, verifying the impossible reality unfolding before my very eyes. He was attempting to drain everything I had built, brick by brick. The legacy he was so proud of was a total fraud. I took a deep breath, ready to strike back. I knew exactly what I needed to do. This was not a spontaneous punishment over a birthday pastry. This was a premeditated financial ambush, and I had walked right into it. Elias leaned back in his heavy leather chair, his dark eyes fixed intensely on me. He turned his laptop monitor slightly so I could see the full extent of the damage Julian had attempted to inflict on my commercial real estate portfolio. He transferred $2.5 million into his mother Beatrice's charity foundation, Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. "And it gets much worse, Maya. He used your commercial properties, specifically the Midtown Plaza, as collateral for a failing offshore investment firm. He forged your digital signature on the loan documents to secure the capital he desperately needed." I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over me. The initial shock was completely gone, replaced by a hyper-focused clarity that I had developed during my years navigating the foster care system. Julian thought he was playing chess, but he was playing checkers with someone who owned the entire board. He assumed that because I desired a family, I would be blind to his financial manipulations. He assumed wrong. "Elias," I said, leaning forward and placing my hands flat on the mahogany desk. "You told me about the specific fraud clause in our prenuptial agreement. The one we explicitly added after his firm had that little liquidity crisis 2 years ago." Elias's lips curved into a sharp, predatory smile. "Yes. The clause clearly stipulates that if either party attempts to hide assets, transfer funds over $1 million without mutual consent, or forge signatures, the other party has the absolute right to immediately freeze all joint and personal assets. It also allows for the immediate administrative recall of any transferred funds before they can clear international holding accounts." "Do it," I commanded, my voice echoing loudly in the silent office. "Trigger the clause right now. Freeze everything. Revoke his personal and business credit lines. Recall the $2.5 million from Beatrice's fraudulent charity account. And put a hard legal stop on that offshore loan. I want him completely cut off from every single dime." Elias did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. His fingers flew across his keyboard, initiating the aggressive legal and financial mechanisms that would systematically dismantle Julian's temporary illusion of power. Within minutes, the total financial lockdown was securely executed. Julian was now financially paralyzed. I stood up, smoothing my designer skirt and gathering my belongings. "I will handle the situation at home, Elias," I stated confidently. "Keep me continuously updated on the recall of the stolen funds. Be extremely careful." Maya, Elias warned, his expression deadly serious. "Men like Julian do not react gracefully when they lose control. They are accustomed to inherited power, and they panic when they realize they have absolutely none." "I am not afraid of him," I replied, meeting his gaze. "He should be absolutely terrified of me." I confidently walked out of the towering glass law firm and headed down toward the underground parking garage. The crisp Atlanta air felt invigorating against my skin, providing a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of my marriage. As I approached my luxury SUV, I reached into my purse to retrieve my phone. It had been resting on silent mode since I left the bakery this morning. I pressed the power button, and the screen instantly lit up with a relentless barrage of frantic notifications. There were exactly 74 missed calls from Julian. I smiled, a genuine smile of deep, absolute satisfaction. The financial lockdown had successfully taken effect. His carefully curated world of luxury and entitlement was rapidly crumbling, and he was in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. I unlocked my vehicle, tossed my purse onto the passenger seat next to the forgotten pastry box, and climbed inside. Before starting the engine, I checked my voicemails. There were 12 automated messages waiting for me. I pressed play on the first one. Maya, answer the damn phone. Julian's voice echoed through the car speakers, tight with suppressed rage and confusion. My black card just declined at the luxury dealership. They are running the transaction again, but you need to fix this glitch right now. Call me back immediately. I skipped directly to the final voicemail which he had left just 2 minutes prior. Maya, what the hell did you do? Julian yelled, his sophisticated investment banker facade completely destroyed. Everything is locked. My personal checking accounts, my business credit lines, everything. The dealership manager just asked me in front of everyone if there was a problem with my bank. Call me right now or you will deeply regret this. I deleted the voicemails and started the car engine. I was absolutely not going to call him back. I was going to look him directly in the eyes when his distorted reality fractured into a million pieces. I drove back to Buckhead with my heavy vehicle gliding smoothly over the interstate. I pulled through the towering wrought iron gates of our estate, listening to the tires crunch on the expensive gravel driveway. Julian's sleek luxury sedan was parked haphazardly near the front entrance, providing a stark contrast to his usual meticulous parking habits. I parked my vehicle, grabbed my purse and the pastry box, and walked toward the heavy oak front door. I took a deep breath to center myself. I was no longer the accommodating wife desperately trying to fit into his elite world. I was the architect of my own empire, and I was here to fiercely defend it. I pushed the door open and stepped into the grand marble foyer. Julian was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his phone pressed aggressively to his ear. When he saw me step inside, he abruptly ended his call and stormed directly toward me. What did you do? He demanded, his face flushed a dark, angry red. My cards are entirely useless. The bank manager says there is a severe legal hold on my accounts. Tell your attack dog lawyer to reverse this action right now. I calmly walked past him, heading toward the massive marble kitchen island. I placed the pastry box down and turned to face him. I am simply managing the cash flow, Julian, I said smoothly, echoing his earlier condescending words to me. You explicitly said I needed to learn how to stick to a strict budget. I am just applying that exact same prudent financial principle to your reckless spending. You have absolutely no right to do this, he sneered, stepping closer to intimidate me. That is my money, my family's legacy money. Actually, I corrected him, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and composed. $2.5 million of that money was strictly mine. The money you stole early this morning and tried to hide in your mother's fraudulent charity foundation. The money you actively tried to leverage using my commercial properties and my forged digital signature. Julian hesitated for a tiny fraction of a second, exposing a brief flash of guilt that he quickly masked with towering arrogance. I was protecting our assets, he lied smoothly without breaking eye contact. Your real estate deals are risky. I was merely diversifying our portfolio to ensure the family's long-term future. You were desperately covering your offshore gambling debts, I countered sharply. You were stealing from me to save your failing investment firm. But you made a catastrophic mistake, Julian. You arrogantly thought you could control me. You forgot that I built my massive empire long before I ever met you. Suddenly, Trey stomped down the grand sweeping staircase, his face contorted into a furious, spoiled scowl. Dad, what is going on? He whined loudly. The dealership said the wire transfer did not go through for the Range Rover. They told me I could not take the car home today. Make her fix it. Julian glared at me with pure venom. Fix it, Maya. Do it now, or you will truly regret it. I looked at Trey, then shifted my gaze back to Julian. The Range Rover purchase is permanently cancelled, I stated firmly. There will be no $90,000 vehicle for a boy who speaks to me with such blatant disrespect. And there will be absolutely no more free financial rides for a husband who actively steals from his wife. Before Julian could even formulate a response to my declaration, the heavy front door burst open. Beatrice, my haughty mother-in-law, marched into the foyer, followed closely by Chloe, my grifter sister-in-law. Beatrice was dressed in a tailored designer suit, her expression radiating pure aristocratic fury. Chloe trailed behind her, aggressively clutching a thick stack of printed papers. Maya, what is the meaning of this outrage? Beatrice demanded, her sharp voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. The foundation's checking accounts are entirely frozen. The bank president says there is a legal dispute regarding the recent wire transfer. You are profoundly embarrassing this family in front of the entire city. Chloe stepped forward roughly, throwing a piece of paper onto the kitchen island, right next to the pastry box. And what about this? She shrieked hysterically. The invoice for the Legacy Foundation Gala scheduled for next weekend. It is exactly $150,000. The hotel event coordinator just called and said the payment method on file was rejected. We have 500 influential guests coming. The mayor is attending. You need to pay this invoice right now. I looked down at the expensive invoice, then slowly looked at the 3 generations of entitled legacy wealth standing before me. They were all aggressively demanding my money while simultaneously treating me like dirt on their expensive shoes. They genuinely believed their old money social status gave them the absolute right to continually exploit me. I picked up the invoice, examining the astronomical charges carefully. $150,000 for a single night of superficial social posturing. It was completely absurd. But looking closely at the document, I realized it was also the perfect opportunity. You really want me to pay this? I asked, looking directly into Beatrice's furious eyes. You want me to ensure the charity gala goes off without a single hitch? Yes, Beatrice snapped, crossing her arms haughtily. It is the absolute least you can do after causing this ridiculous financial misunderstanding. You must fix this situation immediately before our pristine reputation is permanently ruined. I smiled, a slow, calculated smile that made Julian narrow his eyes in deep suspicion. Of course, Beatrice, I said, my voice dripping with forced sugary sweetness. I would not dream of ruining the family's elite reputation. I will personally guarantee that the prestigious venue is fully secured for the gala. Chloe smirked, exchanging a highly triumphant look with Beatrice. I told you she would cave, Chloe whispered loudly enough for me to hear. She knows she desperately needs our family name. Julian relaxed slightly, his insufferable arrogance rapidly returning. See, Maya, he said confidently, it is always better when you just cooperate with us. Now call Elias and unfreeze the joint accounts. I will handle the gala venue first, I said, casually picking up my designer purse. I need to make a few urgent calls to ensure the payment is processed correctly. Excuse me. I walked out of the grand kitchen, leaving them to bask in their false sense of victory. They foolishly thought they had won. They truly believed I was submitting to their outrageous demands, simply to maintain my fragile place in their elite high society world. They had absolutely no idea what I was actually doing. As I walked down the long hallway toward my private home office, I pulled out my phone and dialed Elias's direct number. Elias, I said the moment he quickly answered the line. Did they ambush you? He asked, his voice sharp and alert. Yes, I replied securely, closing the heavy oak door of my office behind me. Beatrice and Chloe just demanded I pay the $150,000 invoice for the Legacy Foundation Gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel next weekend. And I assume you told them to go straight to hell, Elias stated confidently. No, I said, a cold, ruthless smile playing on my lips. I told them I would personally guarantee the venue. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Maya, what exactly are you planning? Elias, I want you to initiate the immediate purchase of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Use the anonymous commercial holding company we set up last year. I want the total acquisition finalized before next weekend. I do not just want to pay for their little gala. I want to own the entire building they are standing in. I heard Elias chuckle, a rare sound that meant he was truly impressed by the sheer magnitude of the aggressive maneuver. Consider it done, Maya, he promised. I will have the acquisition paperwork started within the hour. I hung up the phone and looked out the massive window of my office. Julian, Beatrice, and Chloe thought they were expertly manipulating me. They thought they could continuously use my hard-earned money to fund their pathetic illusions of grandeur. But they were about to discover a brutal truth. When you try to steal from a powerful self-made woman, you do not just lose your money, you lose everything. The trap was perfectly set, and they were walking blindly into it. The very next morning, the Atlanta sun rose over my sprawling Buckhead estate, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. I was already awake, sitting at the marble kitchen island with a cup of black coffee. My phone vibrated against the cool stone surface. It was a text message from my mother-in-law, Beatrice. The message was brief and dripping with her usual passive-aggressive authority. She commanded my presence at the Piedmont Country Club for a supposedly impromptu Legacy Charity Board luncheon at noon. She explicitly stated it was a mandatory gathering to discuss the upcoming gala logistics. I knew exactly what this was. It was not a casual lunch. It was a public execution. Beatrice wanted to parade me in front of her high society friends to remind me of my place. She wanted to humiliate me and reestablish her dominance after the financial scare I had given them yesterday. I finished my coffee and walked upstairs to my massive walk-in closet, taking a moment to appreciate the sheer scale of the luxury I had earned entirely on my own merits. If I was going to an execution, I was going to dress like the executioner. I bypassed the loud designer logos Chloe preferred and selected a beautifully tailored olive green Tom Ford suit. The thick and incredibly expensive fabric moved perfectly across my skin. It screamed old money power without needing to announce itself to anyone in the room. I paired it with simple diamond studs and a rare vintage Cartier watch that I bought to celebrate my very first successful corporate real estate acquisition. I needed to look like a woman who was quietly submissive, while internally I was orchestrating their total destruction. The drive through the wealthy neighborhoods gave me ample time to mentally prepare for the vicious psychological warfare I knew was waiting for me. I arrived at the prestigious Piedmont Country Club exactly at noon today. The club was a historic fortress of Atlanta elite society, boasting sprawling golf courses and exclusive dining rooms, where generational wealth gathered to gossip and scheme. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the heavy mahogany doors. The maitre d' escorted me to the private sunroom overlooking the 18th hole. Beatrice was already there holding court at a large circular table. She was surrounded by 6 of her closest friends. These were the matriarchs of the city women who spent their days organizing charity balls and tearing down anyone who did not possess the right pedigree. As I approached the table, the chatter abruptly stopped. 7 pairs of heavily manicured hands adjusted their crystal glasses, and 7 pairs of judgmental eyes locked onto me. "Maya, darling." Beatrice announced, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "How kind of you to finally join us. Please take the empty seat at the end." I took my seat, offering a very polite, measured smile. The luncheon began with a grueling hour of relentless microaggressions. Beatrice and her friends engaged in a highly coordinated verbal assault disguised as polite Southern conversation. They discussed their generational wealth, their prestigious sorority chapters, and their ancestral vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard. Every topic was a deliberate attempt to highlight my lack of aristocratic background. "You know Maya, one of Beatrice's oldest friends," a woman named Cassandra said, while delicately slicing her salad. "We were just talking about how incredibly generous Julian is. It takes a very special kind of man to look past a woman's rough upbringing, to take someone from the foster care system and elevate her to this level of society. It is truly noble. He practically saved you from the streets." Beatrice nodded solemnly, touching her pearl necklace. "Julian has always had a soft spot for charity cases. He believes everyone deserves a second chance, no matter how unfortunate their origins might be. I am just glad he was able to provide you with a stable roof over your head." I gripped my linen napkin tightly under the table, but I kept my facial expression perfectly blank. I did not defend myself. I did not point out that the stable roof over my head was a multi-million-dollar mansion I had purchased entirely with my own commercial real estate profits. I played my part flawlessly. I lowered my eyes, looking appropriately chastised and submissive. "You are right, Beatrice," I said softly, keeping my voice meek. "Julian has done so much for me. I am very grateful for the family." The women exchanged satisfied smirks. My deliberate display of weakness emboldened them. Beatrice clapped her hands together, signaling the transition to her main agenda. "Now that we have caught up, we have some official board business to attend to," Beatrice declared, signaling a waiter to clear our plates. "As you know, Maya the Legacy Foundation Gala is our most critical event of the year. Given the recent financial misunderstandings and your obvious lack of experience in managing high-level society functions, the board has reached a unanimous decision. We feel it is best if you step down from your position on the planning committee. Before I could even feign surprise, the heavy double doors of the sunroom opened. A young woman strutted into the room carrying a ridiculously oversized Birkin bag. She looked no older than 25, wearing a tight designer dress that was entirely inappropriate for a country club luncheon. "This is Sasha," Beatrice announced, gesturing for the young woman to stand beside her. Sasha is a very close family friend. She comes from an excellent family with deep ties to our organization. The board has officially voted to have Sasha replace you on the committee effective immediately. She will be handling the VIP coordination for the gala. I stared at Sasha, processing the sheer audacity of the situation. Sasha was not just a close family friend. She was Julian's secret mistress. I had known about her for 3 months. I had hired a private investigator who documented every single luxury vacation and expensive dinner Julian had funded for her using my corporate accounts. Bringing the mistress to a society luncheon and giving her my board seat was the ultimate insult. Beatrice was explicitly telling me that I was replaceable. She was flaunting my husband's infidelity in my face, while her friends watched with breathless anticipation, waiting for me to crack. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of a public meltdown. I channeled every ounce of discipline I possessed. I looked at Sasha, offering her a fragile, trembling smile. "It is nice to meet you, Sasha," I said, my voice quivering just enough to sound thoroughly defeated. "I am sure you will do a wonderful job with the gala." Sasha smirked, looking down at me with unearned superiority. "I know I will," she replied, flipping her long extensions. "Julian told me I have a natural talent for managing important affairs. I am just happy to help the family move forward in a better direction." Beatrice slid a stack of legal documents across the table, along with a gold-plated pen. "These are the formal resignation papers," Beatrice instructed coldly. "Sign them. It is for the best. You have too much on your plate anyway with those little construction projects of yours." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. The entire table held their collective breath, eager to witness my total subjugation. They wanted to break my spirit and cast me out of their elite circle. They thought they had backed me into a corner. I slowly signed my name on the dotted line. I made my signature small and messy, perfectly fitting the character of a broken woman submitting to her wealthy superiors. I pushed the documents back toward Beatrice. "There," I whispered softly. "I hope the gala is a massive success." Beatrice snatched the papers, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. She immediately signaled the waiter to bring out a bottle of vintage champagne. "Let us toast to the future of the Legacy Foundation," Beatrice declared, raising her crystal flute high into the air. "And to new beginnings with people who truly understand our vision." The women all raised their glasses, chiming their agreement. Sasha raised her glass, leaning against the table with a smug, triumphant grin. They were celebrating my demise. They were toasting to the humiliation of the foster kid who dared to step into their aristocratic world. I picked up my water glass, holding it up in silent mock participation. Just as their crystal flutes clinked together, producing a sharp ringing sound across the sunroom, my cell phone vibrated violently against my leg in my coat pocket. I carefully pulled the phone out, keeping it hidden below the edge of the table. The screen illuminated, displaying an urgent priority text message from Elias. I opened the message and read the brief, chilling words. "Julian just filed for an expedited secret divorce," Elias wrote. "The courier just dropped the papers at my office. He is aggressively demanding 50% of your entire commercial real estate company, 50% of the residential properties, and permanent lifetime spousal support. He claims you are financially unstable and emotionally volatile." I stared at the illuminated screen, the words burning themselves into my retinas. The sheer magnitude of Julian's betrayal hit me like a physical blow. He was not just trying to replace me with a younger version. He was actively trying to bankrupt me. He wanted to strip me of the empire I had built from absolute nothing and hand it over to his mistress and his mother. He wanted to leave me on the streets, right back where I started. The luncheon chatter faded into a dull, buzzing background noise. I looked up slowly, scanning the faces of the women around the table. Beatrice was laughing loudly at a joke Sasha had just made. They thought they had executed the perfect ambush. They thought the game was over and they had won the ultimate prize. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had backed a predator into a corner and expected her to surrender. I calmly locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The fragile, defeated facade I had been maintaining melted away instantly. I sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and aligning my spine. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. The divorce filing was the final trigger I needed. There was no more holding back. There was no more playing the accommodating wife, trying to buy the love of a toxic family. Julian had officially declared absolute war, and I was going to ensure that he and his entire bloodline would burn in the fallout. I left the Piedmont Country Club with a singular, terrifying focus. The drive back to Buckhead was a blur of calculated strategy and suppressed rage. Julian had crossed the ultimate boundary. He was attempting to legally blindside me with an expedited divorce to seize half of my life's work. I pulled my heavy G-Wagon into the circular driveway of our sprawling estate, expecting to find the massive house empty so I could prepare my ruthless counterattack with Elias. Instead, I saw Julian's luxury sedan parked near the front door. Right beside it was a sleek white Mercedes convertible. The license plate was a customized vanity tag that boldly read, Sasha. The sheer, unparalleled audacity of the man was absolutely breathtaking. He had just ambushed me with divorce papers via courier, and now he was bringing his 25-year-old mistress directly into my sanctuary. I stepped through the heavy front doors and immediately heard laughter echoing from the formal living room. I walked down the marble hallway, my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished stone. Julian was sitting comfortably on the custom velvet sofa, pouring a generous glass of expensive scotch. Sasha was perched right beside him, her long legs crossed, wearing the exact same inappropriate designer dress she had worn to the country club luncheon just an hour ago. They were clinking their crystal glasses together, openly celebrating their perceived victory over me. When Julian saw me standing silently in the doorway, his smile widened into a smug, arrogant grin. Maya, he said smoothly, not even bothering to stand up and greet his wife. I am so glad you are home early today. Sasha here is a very important business associate. We are discussing some urgent corporate restructuring for my investment firm. She has a brilliant analytical mind for complex business acquisitions. Sasha offered me a highly patronizing wave. It is so nice to see you again, Maya, she chirped, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Julian has been telling me all about your little real estate construction projects. It is so incredibly cute how hard you work to keep yourself busy. I looked at the two of them sitting comfortably in the house I paid for, drinking the expensive liquor I bought. Julian was deliberately flaunting his infidelity right in my face, trying to break my spirit and violently assert his dominance. He wanted me to scream and cry. He wanted me to throw a hysterical fit so he could immediately use it as evidence of my emotional instability in the impending divorce proceedings. I absolutely refused to play into his manipulative hands. I kept my face entirely blank, meticulously masking the lethal financial trap I was actively setting for them both. Julian stood up, setting his heavy scotch glass down on the glass coffee table. Sasha, darling, give us a brief minute, he instructed, smoothly adjusting his tailored suit jacket. Maya and I need to discuss some highly internal family business in her office. Sasha pouted playfully, but nodded her head. Take your time, Julian, she purred loud enough for me to hear. I will just wait right here and admire the gorgeous architecture of this massive house. Julian walked toward me, grabbing my arm with a firm, controlling grip. He practically dragged me down the long hallway and violently shoved me into my private home office, firmly closing the heavy oak doors behind us. The moment the brass latch clicked, his charming societal facade completely vanished. His handsome face instantly hardened into a terrifying mask of pure, ruthless ambition and unadulterated greed. You received the urgent courier package from my expensive lawyers, I assume Julian demanded aggressively, crossing his arms over his chest to intimidate me. I stepped safely behind my large mahogany desk, putting a solid physical barrier between us. Yes, I received it, I whispered, keeping my voice deliberately shaky and weak. Julian, you simply cannot do this to me. You are aggressively demanding 50% of my entire commercial real estate portfolio. I built this development company from absolute nothing. Al built it while you were legally married to me. He corrected, his voice heavily laced with venom. That makes every single property marital property, Maya. And I am taking exactly what I deserve for putting up with you. My investment firm desperately needs a massive influx of liquid capital to survive this quarter, and your assets are the only viable solution to my problem. You are going to sign over 50% of your holding company today, right now, without a fight. I forced my eyes to widen in feigned sheer terror. And if I absolutely refuse, I asked, my voice trembling perfectly to feed his massive ego. Julian leaned heavily over the desk, placing his hands flat on the polished wood to physically intimidate me. If you refuse, I will utterly destroy you in this entire city. I will drag your name through the mud in every single elite country club and prestigious charity board in Atlanta. I will expose your pathetic foster care background to the hungry media and aggressively paint you as a mentally unstable gold digger who maliciously used my family's legacy name to secure your initial business loans. You will never secure another commercial building permit or high society client in Georgia again. You will be a total social outcast. I let out a small, pathetic gasp, bringing a trembling hand up to my mouth. I channeled every single ounce of fear I had ever felt as a helpless, vulnerable child in the foster system, projecting it outward to feed his dangerous narcissism. You would really ruin me, Julian. I sobbed softly, forcing a single tear to spill over my eyelashes. After everything I have tirelessly done to financially support this ungrateful family. Julian smiled, a cold, terrifying, predatory smile. I am a legacy, Maya. I have the powerful judges, the corrupt politicians, and the social elite completely in my pocket. You have absolutely no one standing behind you. You are just a pathetic stray dog I brought inside out of sheer pity. Now stop crying and do exactly what you are told, like a good little wife. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick legal document, throwing it aggressively onto my desk. He casually tossed a heavy gold fountain pen right beside it. Sign the asset transfer agreement. Maya, Julian ordered, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Sign over 50% of the corporate entities peacefully right now, and I will generously allow you to keep your little residential properties. I might even let you keep a modest monthly allowance so you do not end up back on the dangerous streets. Make this easy for yourself and just sign the damn paper. I stared down at the dense legal document his expensive lawyers had drafted. It was a complete, unconditional surrender of my entire life's work. I looked up at Julian, my eyes wide and swimming with fake, desperate tears. You promise you will not ruin my reputation in Atlanta if I sign this? I pleaded softly, acting completely shattered and defeated. I promise, Maya. Julian lied smoothly. His dark eyes gleamed with greedy anticipation. Just sign the damn paper, and this will all be over. I slowly reached for the heavy gold fountain pen. My hand was visibly shaking, portraying the ultimate picture of submission. I gently pulled the thick document closer to my chest. But as I did, I subtly and silently slid open the top drawer of my mahogany desk. Inside the drawer was a single crisp sheet of paper Elias had quietly couriered to me earlier that morning. It was a highly classified document we had meticulously prepared specifically for this exact moment in time. I swiftly and seamlessly swapped Julian's asset transfer agreement with my own document, keeping it partially covered by my trembling hand. I took a deep, shuddering breath and signed my name on the bottom line with a swift, fluid motion. I did not write a messy, defeated signature this time. I wrote my name with the bold, aggressive, unyielding strokes of an absolute conqueror. I slid the document across the mahogany desk toward him. Here I whispered, my head bowed in total submission. It is done, Julian. You finally got exactly what you wanted. Julian snatched the paper eagerly from the desk, a loud, victorious laugh erupting from his chest. He was practically vibrating with unchecked arrogance. I told you, Maya, he gloated arrogantly, folding the document without looking at it. You should never try to fight someone who possesses generational power and wealth. You are completely out of your league. Now pack a small bag and get out of my house immediately. Sasha is moving her things into the master bedroom tonight. I slowly lifted my head. The fake, desperate tears were completely gone. My posture instantly straightened, and the fragile, defeated woman vanished entirely into thin air. I looked directly at him with eyes as cold and hard as solid obsidian. "You might want to actually read what I just signed, Julian," I said, my voice incredibly steady and razor sharp. Julian stopped his triumphant laughter, abruptly cutting off. He frowned, looking down at the folded paper resting in his hands. He slowly unfolded it, and his dark eyes quickly scanned the bold legal text printed at the top of the page. I watched the exact moment his entire reality violently shattered. The smug, arrogant color violently drained from his handsome face, leaving him looking extremely pale and suddenly very sick. "What is this?" he whispered, his hands beginning to tremble uncontrollably. "This is definitely not the asset transfer agreement I gave you." "No, it is not," I replied casually, leaning back in my expensive leather chair and crossing my arms. "It is a formal notice of foreclosure and eviction." Julian stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing repeatedly without producing any sound. "You see, Julian?" I continued, my tone conversational and remarkably light. "When you secretly bought that luxurious $2 million penthouse condo in Midtown for your lovely little mistress Sasha, you genuinely thought you were being incredibly clever. You deliberately set it up through an anonymous shell company to completely hide it from my lawyers. But you made a massive critical error. You foolishly used funds directly diverted from my commercial real estate accounts to secure the initial mortgage." Julian was rapidly hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal jargon on the page. "Since you committed federal wire fraud using my corporate assets to secretly fund your little love nest, my brilliant lawyer Elias easily pierced the corporate veil of your pathetic shell company," I explained, watching his total emotional devastation unfold. "I legally bought out the remaining mortgage on that exact penthouse yesterday afternoon. I am now the sole legal owner of the property, and the document you are currently holding is the official eviction notice I just personally authorized." "You absolutely cannot do this," Julian choked out, dropping the paper onto the desk as if it had physically burned his fingers. "You cannot throw us out on the street." "I just did," I smiled ruthlessly, showing all my teeth. "The authorities are currently downstairs at the penthouse, physically removing Sasha's expensive designer wardrobe and throwing it directly onto the dirty street. In exactly 1 hour, she will be entirely homeless. And since I just triggered the fraud clause freezing all your personal banking accounts, you do not even have enough liquidity to rent her a cheap motel room for the night." Julian backed away from the desk, his chest heaving with panic. "You are a terrible monster," he hissed, stepping toward the door. "I am a self-made billionaire, Julian." I corrected him, standing up and smoothing my tailored suit. "And you are a broke, desperate man who just lost his mistress's home because he arrogantly thought he could outsmart his wife. Now get out of my office before I call hotel security to remove you from my property. The war has officially started and you have already lost your queen." I took a deep breath, ready to strike back, because I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The emergency hearing in Judge Randolph's chambers was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Elias had warned me that Julian's legal team was pulling out all the stops to portray me as a volatile and erratic businesswoman who was a danger to her own assets. I sat beside Elias at the oak table, wearing another sharp-tailored suit, this time in midnight black. Across the aisle, Julian sat, flanked by 2 high-priced attorneys from a downtown legacy firm. His expression was a carefully practiced mask of concern for my mental well-being. Julian's lead counsel, a silver-haired shark named Harrison, cleared his throat and stepped forward to address the judge. "Your Honor, we are requesting an emergency temporary conservatorship over Mrs. Vance's commercial and residential real estate portfolio, as well as her corporate entities." Harrison spoke with theatrical gravity. "As the court will see from medical affidavits and past corporate restructuring records, Mrs. Vance has a history of intense emotional volatility and business obsession. Her recent erratic financial decisions pose a severe and immediate threat to the marital estate." Judge Randolph, a stern woman with decades on the bench, adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at me. "Mrs. Vance, what do you have to say in response to these allegations of instability?" Before I could open my mouth to speak, Julian's lawyer seized the narrative. to understand her current fragile state. Your Honor, we must look back at her traumatic past. Years ago, before she married my client, she lost a major commercial development project due to sheer professional exhaustion and erratic management. She suffered a severe burnout that required extensive psychological counseling. My client, Mr. Vance, has spent the last 4 years lovingly managing her stress and protecting her from her own self-destructive impulses. Now she is experiencing a relapse. A collective murmur rippled through the chambers. Julian played his part to absolute perfection. He lowered his head and rubbed his temples as if he were a burdened, exhausted husband who had suffered endlessly trying to save his unstable wife from herself. It was a masterclass in psychological gaslighting, designed to convince the court that my success was merely a fluke, and my independence was a symptom of mental illness. I felt the familiar heat of anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to remain completely ice cold. I caught Elias's eye. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to spring the trap. Elias stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate, unhurried grace. He walked over to the center of the room, holding a sleek black tablet. Your Honor, while Mr. Harrison paints a very dramatic picture of my client's mental health, he conveniently omitted the actual financial reality of this marriage. Mrs. Vance is not erratic. She is simply auditing the man who has been systematically looting her empire. Julian's lawyer scoffed. Your Honor, we object. This is a matter of mental health and conservatorship, not a financial dispute. Overruled counsel, let Mr. Elias speak, Judge Randolph commanded sharply. Elias connected his tablet to the courtroom display screen. Instantly, high-resolution financial documents, corporate wire receipts, and banking ledgers filled the monitors. Let us talk about financial stability, Your Honor. Mr. Julian Vance claims my client is erratic. Yet just 48 hours ago, Mr. Vance initiated an unauthorized wire transfer of $2.5 million from a joint corporate account into an offshore entity controlled by his mother. Furthermore, he forged my client's digital signature to use her flagship property as collateral for a failing personal investment. The courtroom fell into a stunned, dead silence. Julian's head snapped up, his face turning completely pale as he stared at the glowing financial records displayed on the screen. Elias continued smoothly tapping the screen to highlight specific columns of data. But that is merely the surface. We have obtained certified records of Mr. Vance's extensive offshore gambling debts, totaling over $4 million accumulated across private casinos in the Bahamas and London over the past 18 months. To cover these mounting losses, he systematically forged my client's signature on 3 separate corporate loan documents without her knowledge or consent. Here are the forensic handwriting analysis reports and the IP addresses from which the digital forgeries were executed. All of them trace directly back to Mr. Vance's private office terminal at his investment bank. Julian was hyperventilating now. He turned and whispered frantically to his lead counsel, but Harrison was staring at the documents with wide, disbelieving eyes. The masterclass in gaslighting had completely collapsed in less than 5 minutes. Judge Randolph stared at the display screen, her expression darkening into a mask of pure judicial fury. She looked across the room directly at Julian. Mr. Vance, is this your signature on these corporate loan applications? Julian swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he tried to speak. Your Honor, I can explain. The market volatility required. Silence. Mr. Vance, the judge snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. You come into my chambers under false pretenses, attempting to secure a fraudulent conservatorship over your wife's assets while you are actively committing grand larceny, forgery, and financial fraud. You have abused the process of this court and wasted my time. Judge Randolph did not even wait for Julian's attorneys to offer another feeble excuse. She stood up, grabbing her gavel and slamming it down with a resounding crash. This petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice, the judge declared loudly. Furthermore, I am freezing all remaining personal accounts associated with Mr. Julian Vance, pending a formal criminal referral to the federal prosecutor's office for wire fraud and forgery. This court is adjourned. Judge Randolph turned and swept out of the chambers through her private back door, leaving a heavy, suffocating cloud of defeat hanging over the room. Julian slumped backward into his chair, looking utterly destroyed. His expensive lawyers were already packing their briefcases, frantically distancing themselves from him before the federal warrants could even be drafted. I stood up, smoothing my designer skirt and gathering my personal items. I looked down at Julian, who was staring at the mahogany floor in absolute despair. The war was supposed to be over. I had completely dismantled his legal attack and exposed his criminal fraud to a federal judge. But desperation makes weak men dangerous. Julian was not ready to surrender just yet. As I turned to walk out of the courthouse doors toward my waiting car, Julian lunged forward, catching up to me in the grand marble hallway. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. "Maya, wait," he hissed, grabbing my arm with a desperate grip. "We can settle this. We do not need lawyers. We can talk about this at home. Do not touch me," I warned, pulling my arm away with sharp authority. Julian laughed, a manic, broken sound. "You think you won everything today, don't you, Maya? You think your little corporate lawyer protected you. But you forgot about the family trust. The old ironclad Harrington family trust set up by my great-uncle 50 years ago." I paused, turning slowly to face him. "What are you talking about, Julian?" Julian's manic grin returned, a grotesque imitation of his usual arrogance. "Before we got married, you signed a secondary compliance addendum tied to the family trust to secure our initial residential mortgage in Buckhead. That addendum gives the primary trustee, which happens to be my mother, Beatrice, absolute legal authority to place an emergency structural lien on any commercial property tied to our marital name if the marriage dissolves under contentious circumstances." My heart skipped a beat. No family trust had that kind of sweeping power unless it was specifically amended right before our wedding. Using a loophole, I secretly had my family's estate attorney draft. Julian gloated triumphantly. "As we speak, my mother's legal team is filing an emergency structural lien against your flagship commercial development, the Midtown Plaza, the exact property you need to secure your upcoming billion-dollar institutional valuation next month. Without clear title on that property, your entire corporate expansion collapses. You will be tied up in probate court for the next 10 years. Julian stepped back, smiling like a demon who had just pulled off the ultimate backdoor trick. He adjusted his wrinkled suit jacket and looked down at me with pure sadistic joy. "You can keep your little victory in chambers today, Maya. But by tomorrow morning, your empire will be frozen by a legacy trust you signed away with a smile. Enjoy your little walk to the car." He turned on his heel and walked away, laughing softly into the cavernous hallway. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second as the full weight of his dirty backdoor trick settled over me. He had used a sleeping legal landmine buried deep inside an old family trust to trap my most valuable asset. But as I watched his retreating figure disappear down the marble steps, a cold, fierce realization washed over me. Julian still did not understand who he was fighting. He thought a legacy trust was his ultimate shield. He had no idea that I was about to burn his precious family legacy all the way to the ground. I drove back to the estate, the adrenaline from the courthouse still humming in my veins. The house was unnervingly quiet when I pushed open the front doors. I walked straight toward the West Wing, where I kept my private architectural studio and home office. The heavy oak doors were already ajar. I stepped inside and stopped dead in my tracks. The space was utterly annihilated. The custom glass display cases holding the scale models of my commercial properties were smashed to pieces. The intricate acrylic model of the Midtown Plaza lay in ruins across the Persian rug. Drawers were pulled out, and my private filing cabinets had been crowbarred open. Missing from the bottom drawer were my physical handwritten financial ledgers. Those books contained the initial seed capital records and private equity contacts I used to build my empire from nothing. I heard the unmistakable sound of arrogant laughter coming from the formal living room. I turned on my heel and walked down the hallway. Julian was sitting on the sofa, holding my stolen leather-bound ledgers in his hands. Trey was standing next to him, chest puffed out, holding a silver crowbar like a trophy. "Good job, son," Julian praised, patting the teenager on the back. "You did exactly what a Vance man should do. You protected the family. We will use these ledgers to track down her silent partners and force them to freeze her out of the commercial sector permanently." Julian looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. He smirked, tapping the leather book against his knee. You locked my accounts, Maya. So my son took the initiative to level the playing field. Let us see how your investors react when I show them the messy handwritten math you used to bootstrap your first building project. Trey sneered at me, swinging the crowbar. You took my Range Rover, so I took your stupid little toys. Next time, remember who runs this house. This is my territory. Any normal woman would have screamed. She would have cried over the thousands of hours of work shattered on the floor, or lunged at the insolent teenager holding a weapon. I did absolutely none of those things. I simply stared at the two of them. They truly believed they had executed a brilliant tactical strike. They had no understanding of criminal law. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number. Who are you calling? Julian mocked. Your attack dog lawyer again. Elias cannot unsmash your precious little buildings. I am calling my insurance adjuster, I replied calmly. And then I am calling the Atlanta Police Department to report a felony grand larceny and malicious destruction of private property. Julian rolled his eyes. It is marital property, Maya. A husband cannot steal from a wife. It is a civil dispute. The house is marital property, I corrected him smoothly. The architectural firm housed in the West Wing is an LLC registered solely in my name. The physical models destroyed are insured commercial assets valued at exactly $200,000. Trey is not an employee of my company. He is a trespasser who committed corporate sabotage and felony theft across state lines because my holding company is registered in Delaware. Julian's smug expression faltered rapidly. Trey lowered the crowbar, suddenly looking much younger than 16. You would not dare call the cops on a teenager, Julian challenged, though his voice lacked its previous bravado. I absolutely would, I stated, tapping the screen to connect the call. And while the police are on their way to arrest a minor for a corporate felony, I am going to make a second phone call. I believe Headmaster Sterling at the Buckhead Preparatory Academy has a very strict zero-tolerance policy regarding criminal activity. Do not you dare call his school, Julian commanded, stepping forward and dropping the ledgers onto the coffee table. You will ruin his entire academic future and his chance at college. He ruined his own future the moment he picked up that crowbar, I said coldly. Within 20 minutes, 2 squad cars pulled into the circular driveway. The officers walked through the smashed studio, took photos of the extensive damage, and secured the crowbar as physical evidence. Trey began to hyperventilate when the arresting officer pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. The arrogant teenager who had demanded I ask permission to spend my own money was now crying hysterically, begging his father to do something to fix the problem immediately. Julian frantically pulled the lead officer aside, utilizing all his inherited charm and legacy name-dropping to negotiate. The officer remained completely unbothered by the Vance family pedigree. He explained that because the property belonged to a corporate entity, the theft and damages exceeded the threshold for a simple misdemeanor. Trey was looking at serious juvenile detention time unless the victim agreed to a massive immediate restitution settlement to drop the formal charges prior to booking. While Julian was sweating through his tailored shirt, begging the police, my phone buzzed. It was Headmaster Sterling. I had emailed him the security footage from the hidden cameras in my office 10 minutes prior. The prestigious Buckhead Preparatory Academy prided itself on producing future senators and elite corporate leaders. They did not harbor felons. The headmaster informed me that Trey was expelled effective immediately, and a formal notice was being sent to every elite private school in the state of Georgia to ensure his permanent exclusion. Trey was sobbing on the sofa, his hands cuffed behind his back. Julian rushed over to me, grabbing my shoulders with sheer desperation in his wide eyes. Maya, name your price. Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. I will pay for the damages. Just tell the officers you want to handle the restitution privately. Please do not let them put my son in a squad car and take him away to a detention center. I looked at Julian with utter detachment. The insured value of the destroyed commercial property is exactly $200,000. If that amount is wired to my corporate holding account within the next 10 minutes, I will inform the officers that civil restitution has been fully satisfied, and I will drop the charges. Julian's face twisted in sheer panic. You know my domestic accounts are completely frozen. You locked everything this morning. I do not have access to $200,000 in liquid cash right now. It is impossible. That sounds like a personal problem, Julian. I replied evenly, crossing my arms. You have exactly 8 minutes before they process him and place him in the back of that police cruiser. Julian looked at his crying son, then back at me. He was trapped in a flawless vice of his own making. To save his legacy heir from wearing an orange jumpsuit, he had to produce a massive amount of untraceable cash instantly. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently as he navigated to a highly encrypted banking application. I watched him carefully. I knew exactly what he was about to do. Elias and I had spent the last 3 months searching for the master offshore account. Julian used to hide the millions he had skimmed from various corporate clients. It was a ghost account virtually untraceable through standard legal discovery methods. But if Julian voluntarily initiated a wire transfer from that specific account directly into my corporate ledger, the banking routing numbers would be permanently exposed to federal monitoring systems. The digital trail would be undeniably solid and impossible for him to erase. Julian typed furiously into his phone, bypassing several complex security prompts. He was sweating profusely, trapped between his pride and his absolute desperation to save his son from jail. I am sending the wire, he hissed through clenched teeth. You are a ruthless monster, Maya. I am simply managing the consequences of your poor parenting, I stated flatly, keeping my posture entirely rigid. My phone chimed with an incoming notification from my corporate bank. An international wire transfer of exactly $200,000 had successfully cleared. The funds originated from a Cayman Islands holding company registered under a fictitious name. I quickly took a screenshot of the transaction data and forwarded it directly to Elias with a high-priority flag for immediate processing. The Cayman Islands account was the holy grail of our investigation. For months, Elias had told me that exposing this specific account was the only way to permanently dismantle Julian's protective wall of legacy wealth. The old money elites in Atlanta could forgive infidelity, and they could ignore a messy divorce, but they would absolutely destroy a man who skimmed money from their private investment portfolios. Julian had just handed me the weapon to execute him socially and professionally. The transfer receipt glowed brightly on my phone screen, securing my total victory. It was a beautiful sight. I turned to the police officers and calmly explained that my husband had just satisfied the civil damages in full, and I was formally declining to press criminal charges against his son. They uncuffed a weeping Trey and left the property with stern warnings about future destructive conduct. Julian stood in the center of the living room, breathing heavily. He glared at me with absolute hatred, thinking he had narrowly survived the crisis. He believed he had saved his son by paying a simple cash ransom. He had absolutely no idea that by trying to clean up his entitled stepson's fatal error, he had just handed me the exact financial roadmap I needed to completely destroy him. I drove back to the Buckhead estate with the adrenaline from the courthouse still humming sharply in my veins. Julian thought his little backdoor trick with the legacy trust was a masterstroke, but he had severely underestimated my preparation. Elias and I already had a contingency plan for the Midtown Plaza property. I just needed to get back to my private home office and retrieve the original hard copy ledgers that proved my initial seed capital was entirely separate from the marital estate. Those specific handwritten ledgers were the impenetrable shield I needed to permanently block Beatrice from placing any structural lien on my commercial assets. I pulled my G-Wagon through the wrought iron gates and parked near the massive mahogany front doors. The mansion was unnervingly quiet when I stepped into the grand foyer. I bypassed the main living areas and walked straight toward the west wing, where I kept my private architectural studio and corporate workspace. As I approached the corridor, I noticed the heavy oak double doors were already pushed wide open. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I stepped over the threshold and stopped dead in my tracks. My sanctuary was completely annihilated. The custom glass display cases holding the intricate scale models of my commercial properties were brutally smashed to jagged pieces. The massive acrylic model of the Midtown Plaza, the exact property Julian was trying to steal, lay in ruins across the expensive Persian rug. My drafting tables were overturned. Drawers were pulled out and violently dumped. My secure private filing cabinets had been crowbarred open with brutal force. Missing from the bottom reinforced drawer were my physical handwritten financial ledgers. Those exact books contained the critical early-stage equity contacts and bootstrap records I desperately needed for the trust dispute. I heard the unmistakable sound of arrogant, obnoxious laughter echoing from the formal living room down the hall. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully toward the sound. Julian was sitting comfortably on the custom velvet sofa, holding my stolen leather-bound ledgers in his manicured hands. Trey, his 16-year-old son, was standing proudly next to him, his chest puffed out in sheer defiance. Trey was gripping a heavy silver crowbar, holding it up like a victorious trophy. "Excellent job, son," Julian praised enthusiastically, patting the teenager firmly on the back. "You did exactly what a Vance man should always do. You stepped up and protected the family. We will use these private ledgers to track down her silent partners and force them to freeze her out of the commercial sector permanently. She locked my bank accounts, so you took the initiative to level the playing field." Julian looked up and finally saw me standing silently in the doorway. He smirked, tapping the stolen leather book against his knee. "Let us see how your wealthy investors react when I show them the messy handwritten math you used to bootstrap your first building project," he taunted. Trey sneered at me, swinging the silver crowbar aggressively through the air. "You took away my brand new Range Rover, so I took your stupid little toys." He spat, his voice dripping with venomous entitlement. "Next time, remember who actually runs this house. You are just a guest here, Maya. This is my territory." Any normal woman would have screamed in sheer agony. She would have cried hysterically over the thousands of hours of meticulous architectural work shattered on the hardwood floor. She might have even lunged at the insolent teenager holding a dangerous metal weapon. I did absolutely none of those things. I simply stared at the two of them with utter emotional detachment. They truly believed they had executed a brilliant tactical strike against me. They had absolutely no understanding of corporate criminal law. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I did not shed a single tear of frustration. I slowly pulled my cell phone from my designer suit pocket and dialed a programmed number. "Who exactly are you calling?" Julian mocked, leaning back into the sofa cushions. "Your attack dog lawyer Elias again. He cannot unsmash your precious little buildings, Maya." "I am calling my commercial insurance adjuster," I replied calmly, keeping my eyes locked on his. "And then I am immediately calling the Atlanta Police Department to report a felony grand larceny and malicious destruction of private corporate property." Julian rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "It is marital property, Maya," he stated with supreme arrogance. "A husband cannot legally steal from a wife under Georgia law. This is merely a civil domestic dispute. The police will not do anything." "The primary residence is marital property," I corrected him, my voice smooth and lethal. "The architectural firm, housed in the West Wing, is a completely separate limited liability company registered solely in my name. The physical scale models your son just destroyed are insured commercial assets valued at exactly $200,000. Trey is not an employee of my corporate entity. He is an unauthorized trespasser who just committed deliberate corporate sabotage and felony theft across state lines because my holding company is registered in Delaware." Julian's smug, arrogant expression faltered rapidly. The color began to drain from his face as my legal explanation sank in. Trey lowered the heavy crowbar, suddenly looking much younger than 16. He glanced nervously at his father. "You would not dare call the cops on a teenager?" Julian challenged, though his voice severely lacked its previous commanding bravado. "He is my son, Maya." "I absolutely would," I stated, tapping the glowing screen of my phone to officially connect the emergency call. "And while the police are on their way to arrest a minor for a severe corporate felony, I am going to make a second very important phone call. I believe Headmaster Sterling at the Buckhead Preparatory Academy has a very strict zero-tolerance policy regarding criminal activity among the student body. Do not you dare call his school," Julian commanded, jumping up from the sofa and dropping the stolen ledgers onto the glass coffee table. "You will ruin his entire academic future and completely destroy his chance at an Ivy League college." "He ruined his own future the exact moment he picked up that crowbar," I said coldly, stepping backward into the foyer. Within 20 short minutes, Two flashing squad cars pulled aggressively into the circular gravel driveway of our estate. The responding officers walked systematically through the smashed architectural studio, taking dozens of high-resolution photos of the extensive damage. They carefully secured the silver crowbar as physical criminal evidence. Trey began to hyperventilate intensely when the lead arresting officer pulled out a pair of heavy metal handcuffs. The arrogant, wealthy teenager who had demanded I ask his permission to spend my own hard-earned money was now crying hysterically. He was begging his father to do something to fix the terrifying problem immediately. Julian frantically pulled the lead officer aside, utilizing all his inherited charm and legacy name-dropping to desperately negotiate. The seasoned officer remained completely unbothered by the Vance family pedigree. He sternly explained that because the destroyed property belonged to a registered corporate entity, the theft and physical damages vastly exceeded the legal threshold for a simple misdemeanor. Trey was looking at serious juvenile detention time, unless the corporate victim formally agreed to a massive immediate restitution settlement to drop the felony charges prior to official booking at the station. While Julian was visibly sweating through his expensive tailored shirt, begging the stoic police officers. My phone buzzed with an incoming email. It was Headmaster Sterling. I had emailed him the high-definition security footage from the hidden cameras in my office exactly 10 minutes prior. The prestigious Buckhead Preparatory Academy prided itself heavily on producing future senators and elite corporate leaders. They absolutely did not harbor felons. The headmaster officially informed me that Trey was expelled effective immediately, and a formal disciplinary notice was being sent to every elite private prep school in the state of Georgia to ensure his permanent academic exclusion. Trey was sobbing loudly on the velvet sofa, his hands securely cuffed behind his back. Julian rushed frantically over to me, grabbing my shoulders with sheer naked desperation in his wide, bloodshot eyes. "Maya, please name your price," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking pathetically. "I will personally pay for all the damages. Just tell the police officers you want to handle the financial restitution privately. Please do not let them put my only son in the back of a squad car and take him away to a detention center. I am begging you." I looked at Julian with pure, utter detachment. The comprehensively insured value of the destroyed commercial property is exactly $200,000. If that specific amount is wired directly to my corporate holding account within the next 10 minutes, I will officially inform the officers that civil restitution has been fully satisfied, and I will formally drop the criminal charges. Julian's handsome face twisted in sheer agonizing panic. "You know my domestic accounts are completely frozen. You maliciously locked everything this morning. I do not have access to $200,000 in liquid cash right now. It is mathematically impossible, Maya." "That sounds like a severe personal problem, Julian," I replied evenly, crossing my arms over my chest. "You have exactly 8 minutes left before they process your son and place him permanently in the back of that police cruiser." Julian looked at his loudly crying son, then looked back at me. He was completely trapped in a flawless, unavoidable vice of his own arrogant making. To save his precious legacy heir from wearing an orange jumpsuit, he had to magically produce a massive amount of untraceable cash instantly. He yanked his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently as he quickly navigated to a highly encrypted offshore banking application. I watched his frantic movements carefully. I knew exactly what he was about to do. Elias and I had spent the last 3 grueling months searching tirelessly for the master offshore account Julian used to hide the millions he had illegally skimmed from various corporate clients. It was a phantom ghost account, virtually untraceable through standard legal discovery methods in family court. But if Julian voluntarily initiated a wire transfer from that specific offshore account directly into my domestic corporate ledger, the banking routing numbers would be permanently exposed to federal monitoring systems. The digital paper trail would be undeniably solid and entirely impossible for him to erase or deny. Julian typed furiously into his phone, bypassing several complex biometric security prompts. He was sweating profusely, trapped helplessly between his massive ego and his absolute desperation to save his son from jail. "I am sending the wire right now," he hissed through tightly clenched teeth. "You are a ruthless, terrifying monster, Maya." I am simply managing the severe consequences of your exceptionally poor parenting, I stated flatly, keeping my posture entirely rigid and unyielding. My phone chimed sharply with an incoming priority notification from my corporate bank. An international wire transfer of exactly $200,000 had successfully cleared the holding phase. The funds originated directly from a Cayman Islands holding company registered under a fictitious shell name. I quickly took a high-resolution screenshot of the transaction data and forwarded it directly to Elias, with a high-priority red flag for immediate legal processing. The Cayman Islands account was the absolute holy grail of our financial investigation. For months, Elias had told me that exposing this specific hidden account was the only viable way to permanently dismantle Julian's protective wall of legacy wealth. The old money elites in Atlanta could easily forgive marital infidelity, and they could comfortably ignore a messy, high-profile divorce, but they would absolutely destroy a man who skimmed money from their private investment portfolios. Julian had just willingly handed me the exact weapon needed to execute him socially and professionally. The transfer receipt glowed brightly on my phone screen, securing my total ultimate victory. It was a profoundly beautiful sight. I turned to the waiting police officers and calmly explained that my husband had just satisfied the civil damages in full, and I was formally declining to press criminal charges against his son. They uncuffed a weeping, trembling Trey and left the property with stern, aggressive warnings about future destructive conduct. Julian stood frozen in the center of the living room, breathing heavily. He glared at me with absolute burning hatred, thinking he had narrowly survived the crisis. He truly believed he had saved his son by paying a simple cash ransom. He had absolutely no idea that by trying to clean up his entitled stepson's fatal error, he had just handed me the exact financial roadmap I needed to completely destroy him. The Cayman Islands account was the absolute holy grail of our financial investigation. For months, Elias had told me that exposing this specific hidden account was the only viable way to permanently dismantle Julian's protective wall of legacy wealth. The old money elites in Atlanta could easily forgive marital infidelity, and they could comfortably ignore a messy, high-profile divorce. But they would absolutely destroy a man who skimmed money from their private investment portfolios. Julian had just willingly handed me the exact weapon needed to execute him socially and professionally. The transfer receipt glowed brightly on my phone screen, securing my total ultimate victory. It was a profoundly beautiful sight. I turned to the waiting police officers and calmly explained that my husband had just satisfied the civil damages in full, and I was formally declining to press criminal charges against his son. They uncuffed a weeping, trembling Trey and left the property with stern, aggressive warnings about future destructive conduct. Julian stood frozen in the center of the living room, breathing heavily. He glared at me with absolute burning hatred, thinking he had narrowly survived the crisis. He truly believed he had saved his son by paying a simple cash ransom. He had absolutely no idea that by trying to clean up his entitled stepson's fatal error, he had just handed me the exact financial roadmap I needed to completely destroy him. The moment the police cruisers pulled out of the long gravel driveway, I walked back to my ruined office and locked the heavy oak doors. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elias. "Did you receive the encrypted screenshot?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the destroyed room. "I am looking at it right now," Elias replied, his tone sharp and focused. The routing numbers clearly match the ghost account we suspected he was using. "This is the smoking gun we desperately needed. What is your next strategic move?" I looked down at the shattered architectural models scattered across the Persian rug. Julian's dangerous private lenders. The ones Chloe tearfully mentioned when she was begging for cash. "I want to buy Julian's massive debt, all $5 million of it. I want to become his primary legal creditor." Elias was silent for a long moment, processing the sheer audacity of the aggressive financial maneuver. Maya, purchasing high-risk private debt is incredibly dangerous. Those lenders operate outside the standard banking regulations. "I know exactly how they operate," Elias, I countered firmly. "That is why they will absolutely sell the debt to me for pennies on the dollar. They know Julian's domestic accounts are permanently frozen, and they know his investment firm is actively collapsing. They are currently looking at a total loss. Offer them $2 million in clean, traceable liquid cash for the entire $5 million debt portfolio. They will take the immediate guaranteed payout, and I will legally hold the leash tightly around Julian's arrogant neck. I will initiate the discreet negotiations immediately. Elias promised, his voice reflecting a new level of deep respect. Give me 24 hours to finalize the complex transfer documents. 48 hours later, the highly confidential transaction was successfully completed. I was now legally and officially Julian's primary financial creditor. I essentially owned the man who thought he owned the entire city of Atlanta. And the most beautiful part of the aggressive strategy was that Julian was completely oblivious to his new devastating reality. He was still strutting around the city, desperately trying to secure new gullible investors to pay off his massive hidden debts. He genuinely thought he could use the upcoming Legacy Foundation Gala to charm the Atlanta elite into saving his failing empire. Beatrice and Julian rapidly escalated their psychological warfare as the highly anticipated gala approached. They were completely unaware of the financial noose I had securely tightened around their necks. They believed I was simply a defeated, submissive wife, waiting to be publicly discarded. 2 days before the event, a sleek black envelope was delivered to the estate via private courier. It was addressed to me in Beatrice's elegant, flowing calligraphy. I opened the envelope and pulled out the thick, embossed seating chart for the gala. I scanned the document, finding Julian and Beatrice prominently seated at the head VIP table right next to the mayor and several prominent state senators. I traced my finger down the expensive paper looking for my assigned seat. I found my name listed at table 42. It was a tiny, cramped table located in the far back corner of the massive ballroom, directly next to the noisy, swinging kitchen doors. They had intentionally seated me with the junior event staff and the overflow media personnel. It was a blatant, calculated insult designed to maximize my public humiliation. Beatrice wanted to ensure the entire Atlanta elite witnessed my utter banishment from the inner circle. She wanted everyone to see that the self-made foster kid had been firmly put back in her proper place. I smiled, tracing my manicured finger over the heavy embossed paper. They thought this seating arrangement was a clever psychological attack. They did not realize they had just given me the absolute perfect vantage point to execute my final destructive maneuver. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Elias. He had managed to secure a highly confidential copy of the gala's official timeline. I opened the encrypted attachment and reviewed the schedule. At exactly 9 o'clock, Julian was slated to take the main stage for a keynote address on legacy wealth preservation. According to Elias's inside source, Julian planned to use that specific speech to publicly announce our divorce and declare his complete hostile takeover of my commercial real estate holding company. He was going to try and humiliate me in front of 500 elite guests and then use my stolen assets to secure new investors to pay off his hidden debts. It was an incredibly bold, incredibly stupid plan. I picked up my phone and dialed a private number. The line rang twice before it was answered. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Vance," a polite professional voice greeted me. "This is Marcus, the general manager at the Grand Plaza Hotel. How may I assist you today?" "Marcus," I said smoothly, looking down at the insulting seating chart. "I need to make some highly specific adjustments for the Legacy Foundation Gala on Saturday night." "Of course, Mrs. Vance," Marcus replied eagerly. "Since your holding company finalized the total acquisition of the hotel property last week, my entire staff is at your absolute disposal. What do you need?" "I need a complete total lockdown of the main ballroom's audio-visual control room on the night of the gala." I instructed, my voice deadly serious. "I want my personal security team stationed at the doors. No one enters that room without my explicit direct authorization. Not the event planners, not the hotel staff, and absolutely not Julian or Beatrice Vance." "Understood," Marcus confirmed quickly. "We will secure the AV room completely. Is there anything else you require?" "Yes," I said, a cold, ruthless smile forming on my lips. "I need you to quietly reroute the primary projection feed from the main stage directly to my personal laptop. When Julian Vance takes the microphone at 9 o'clock, I am going to be running the visual presentation myself. I will have the lead technician configure the system immediately," Marcus promised. "It will be seamlessly integrated." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, hanging up the phone. The trap was fully set, and the execution was perfectly orchestrated. Julian and Beatrice thought they were preparing for their grand triumphant moment. They thought they were going to publicly destroy me and reclaim their prestigious legacy status. They had absolutely no idea that they were currently standing on property I entirely owned, preparing to speak into a microphone I completely controlled. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological discipline. I played the role of the broken, defeated wife to absolute perfection. When Beatrice demanded I pick up her custom silk gown from the dry cleaners, I submissively agreed, keeping my eyes lowered in total defeat. When Julian barked orders at me in front of the household staff, telling me to stay out of his way while he prepared his important speech, I simply nodded and retreated to my room. I let them bask in their toxic false sense of ultimate victory. I let them aggressively inflate their massive fragile egos. I wanted them to climb to the absolute highest possible peak of their arrogance because the subsequent fall would be so much more devastating. The afternoon of the gala, Julian cornered me in the grand marble foyer. He was already dressed in a bespoke tailored tuxedo, adjusting his expensive silk bow tie in the large gilded mirror. "Do not even bother showing up tonight," Julian sneered, not bothering to look at me directly. The seating chart was not a mistake. It was a very clear message. This night is for real Atlanta royalty. It is for people with actual generational pedigree and legacy wealth. It is not for street kids who got lucky with a few commercial building permits. Stay home and pack your cheap bags. Sasha is officially moving in on Monday. I looked at him standing there in his expensive tuxedo, looking so incredibly arrogant and so completely vulnerable. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply offered him a quiet, trembling smile. "Have a wonderful evening, Julian." "Julian," I whispered softly, maintaining the illusion of total defeat. "I hope your speech is everything you want it to be." He scoffed, walking out the heavy oak doors without a second backward glance. I watched his sleek luxury sedan pull out of the long driveway heading toward the Grand Plaza Hotel. The moment his taillights disappeared down the street, the fragile, defeated facade instantly vanished. I turned and walked slowly up the sweeping grand staircase, heading straight toward my massive walk-in closet. It was time to get dressed for the execution. I bypassed the conservative, understated suits I usually wore for corporate meetings. Tonight was not about blending in. Tonight was about absolute, undeniable dominance. I selected a custom-made, breathtaking emerald green gown. It was a masterpiece of architectural design, hugging my curves perfectly before flowing into a dramatic, sweeping train. The deep, rich color was a direct nod to the real estate empire I had painstakingly built and the immense wealth I had secured. I paired the stunning gown with a suite of blinding, flawless diamonds, a heavy diamond collar, a matching bracelet, and delicate drop earrings that caught and refracted every single beam of light in the room. These were not inherited legacy jewels passed down from some long-dead aristocratic ancestor. These were victory diamonds purchased with the massive profits from my very first independent commercial plaza acquisition. They represented my strength, my resilience, and my total financial independence. I finished my makeup, applying a deep, bold red lipstick that screamed confidence and unapologetic power. I looked at my reflection in the full-length gilded mirror. The frightened foster kid was entirely gone. The accommodating, submissive wife was permanently dead. The woman staring back at me was a ruthless, self-made billionaire, and she was ready for absolute war. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Elias. "The private equity transfer is officially complete. You legally own his entire $5 million debt portfolio. The AV lockdown is fully secured. The stage is perfectly set, Maya." I smiled, a cold, sharp, predatory smile. I grabbed my designer clutch, sliding my encrypted laptop carefully inside. I walked down the grand staircase and stepped out into the cool Atlanta evening air. A sleek black Maybach was waiting in the circular driveway, the engine purring softly. The driver opened the door and I slid into the plush leather seat. "Take me to the Grand Plaza Hotel," I instructed. "It is time to show the Atlanta elite exactly who owns this city." The luxurious interior of the Maybach was completely silent as we glided through the vibrant streets of downtown Atlanta. I sat in the plush leather seat, staring out the tinted windows at the city skyline. I had spent the last decade building commercial monuments of steel and glass, shaping the very foundation of this city. Julian and his aristocratic family had spent their entire lives merely coasting on a legacy name, throwing lavish parties, and looking down their noses at anyone who had to actually work for a living. Tonight, the fundamental balance of power in this city was going to shift permanently. I rested my hand on the sleek, encrypted laptop resting beside me on the leather seat. Inside its hard drive was the absolute financial destruction of the Vance family. Every forged signature, every hidden offshore transfer, every single unpayable debt was neatly categorized and ready for public broadcast. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer magnitude of my impending victory settle into my bones. I was a self-made titan, and I was about to claim my throne. My cell phone suddenly illuminated the dark cabin with an incoming priority message directly from Elias. The audio-visual lockdown is absolute, Elias wrote his text brief and highly efficient. The hotel general manager has stationed 2 of your private armed security guards at the control room doors. No one gets in or out. The primary projection feed is completely synced to your secure access code. Whenever you are ready, Maya, you have total control of the room. I locked the screen and placed the phone inside my designer clutch. The timing was absolutely flawless. Julian had spent the last 48 hours treating me like an invisible nuisance. He had barked orders at me, told me to fetch his mother's dry cleaning, and confidently banished me to a dark corner near the hotel kitchen. He genuinely thought his psychological warfare had broken my spirit. He had no idea. I was quietly handing him enough rope to hang himself in front of 500 of the wealthiest people in the state of Georgia tonight. The Maybach smoothly turned onto the grand circular driveway of the Grand Plaza Hotel. The scene outside the main entrance was a dazzling spectacle of high society excess. Massive searchlights swept across the pristine facade of the building I now fully owned. A sprawling velvet red carpet led up the marble stairs, flanked by dozens of flashing cameras and local media reporters. This was the Legacy Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of the social calendar for the Atlanta elite. I peered through the dark tinted glass and immediately spotted them. Julian was standing at the center of the red carpet wearing a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo, looking every bit the handsome aristocratic heir. Beatrice stood proudly to his right, dripping in inherited diamonds and wearing a haughty expression of unearned superiority. Chloe was posing dramatically for a photographer wearing a rented designer gown funded by my stolen money. And standing directly to Julian's left, clinging possessively to his arm, was his young mistress, Sasha. Sasha was wearing a sleek silver dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. She was grinning triumphantly at the cameras, soaking up the flashbulbs like she had finally secured her permanent place in high society. Julian was actively leaning into her, completely ignoring the basic boundaries of marital discretion. He was publicly debuting his mistress to the entire city before the divorce paperwork had even been formally processed. My driver smoothly pulled the massive black Maybach directly up to the edge of the red carpet, blocking the view of the lesser luxury vehicles behind us. The media immediately noticed the arrival of the flagship vehicle. Cameras pivoted sharply toward my car, eager to capture whichever high-profile billionaire or politician was about to step out. The driver quickly exited the vehicle and walked briskly around to my side, opening the heavy armored door with a respectful bow. I stepped out of the Maybach and placed my stiletto onto the red carpet. The moment the flashing lights hit my custom emerald green gown, the entire atmosphere outside the hotel fundamentally shifted. The brilliant, rich color of the silk contrasted perfectly against my skin, and the heavy, flawless diamonds around my neck refracted the camera flashes into a blinding halo of pure light. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd of reporters and socialites. The cameras went absolutely wild, the rapid clicking echoing loudly across the courtyard. Maya Vance, a reporter, shouted eagerly. "Over here, Mrs. Vance." I did not stop to pose. I walked forward with the slow, deliberate, confident stride of a reigning monarch surveying her kingdom. The crowd physically parted to let me through. As I approached the center of the red carpet, Julian finally realized who was stealing his media spotlight. He turned around, his charming smile instantly freezing into a mask of pure, unfiltered shock. Beatrice actually dropped her expensive evening bag onto the carpet, her jaw hanging completely open. Chloe stopped posing, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. Sasha's smug, triumphant grin instantly vanished, replaced by a look of deep, profound insecurity as she took in the sheer, overwhelming dominance of my appearance. Julian immediately let go of Sasha's arm and stormed over to me, his face flushing dark red with barely contained fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" Julian hissed under his breath, leaning in close so the hungry media could not hear him. "I explicitly told you to stay home. You are deliberately trying to humiliate me. You look completely ridiculous showing up here like this." I looked up at him, maintaining a calm, polite smile for the flashing cameras. "I am simply attending the charity gala my hard-earned money paid for, Julian." I replied, my voice completely smooth and unbothered. "You look a little tense, darling. Is the pressure of your secret financial ruin finally getting to you?" Julian's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Go to your assigned table in the back near the kitchen," he ordered, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not cause a scene. I will deal with your insubordination when we get home tonight." I laughed, a soft musical sound that carried easily over the noise of the crowd. "We do not have a home anymore, Julian," I reminded him pleasantly. "But good luck with your little speech tonight." I gracefully sidestepped his aggressive posture and glided past Beatrice and Sasha without offering them a single glance. The interior was breathtakingly opulent, adorned with massive crystal chandeliers and towering arrangements of white orchids. Marcus, the hotel general manager, was standing near the entrance to the main ballroom holding a clipboard. When he saw me approaching, he immediately stood at strict attention, offering me a deep, respectful nod, acknowledging his true employer. "Everything is perfectly secured," Mrs. Vance Marcus murmured quietly as I walked past him. "The control room is locked down, and the primary feed is waiting for your digital signal." I thanked him with a brief nod and stepped into the massive, crowded ballroom. The space was filled with 500 of the most powerful, influential, and wealthy individuals in the state of Georgia. Politicians, corporate executives, and legacy family patriarchs mingled, holding crystal flutes of expensive champagne. As I walked through the room, conversations abruptly stopped. Heads turned and whispers spread like a sudden wildfire. I ignored the stares and bypassed table 42 entirely. The cramped little table near the swinging kitchen doors was completely empty, a pathetic monument to Beatrice's petty psychological warfare. I did not sit down. I walked straight to the back of the room, ascending the plush carpeted stairs to the elevated VIP viewing gallery, where Elias was waiting quietly in the shadows. "You look like absolute murder," Elias commented dryly, handing me a fresh glass of sparkling water. "I feel like it," I replied, setting my designer clutch onto the high cocktail table and retrieving my encrypted laptop. I powered on the machine, typing in my secure access code. The screen illuminated instantly, connecting to the hotel's master audio-visual system. Down below, the grand crystal chandeliers began to slowly dim, signaling the official start of the evening's formal program. Beatrice walked up to the acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced, elegant grace. "Good evening, esteemed guests," she began, her voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. "Tonight we gather to celebrate the enduring strength of legacy. We celebrate the powerful families who built this great city, and no one embodies that noble tradition more than my son. Please welcome the brilliant savior of the Vance family legacy, Julian." I placed my finger over the enter key on my laptop. The final execution was now fully ready to begin. The entire room waited in complete, breathless silence for Julian to finally step up and proudly speak today. Beatrice stepped up to the acrylic podium, the spotlight catching the massive vintage diamonds resting against her collarbone. She looked over the sea of influential faces, her expression a mask of maternal pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice echoing through the sound system, "welcome to the 40th Annual Legacy Foundation Gala. We gather tonight in Atlanta not just to celebrate charity, but to honor the strength of our shared heritage. For generations, families like mine have stood as pillars of this great city. We have weathered economic storms. We maintained our standards and our commitment to preserving the wealth our ancestors built. She paused, dabbing the corner of her eye with a handkerchief. The crowd offered a soft murmur of sympathetic applause. But preserving a legacy is not an easy task. Beatrice continued, her tone shifting. It requires ruthless dedication. It requires knowing who truly belongs in our inner circle and who is an opportunist looking for a free ride. Recently, my family faced a significant internal challenge. We were tested by outside forces that sought to drain our resources. But a true Vance never surrenders. She extended her hand dramatically toward the edge of the stage. Tonight, I present the man who secured our family's financial supremacy. He is a brilliant investment banker, a devoted father, and the undisputed savior of the Vance family legacy. Raise your glasses and welcome my remarkable son, Julian Vance. The grand ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The elite crowd, oblivious to the massive financial fraud, stood up to cheer. From my elevated vantage point in the VIP gallery, I watched Julian swagger onto the stage. He was soaking up the adoration like a starving man. He kissed his mother on the cheek and took his place behind the podium. Julian gripped the podium, leaning into the microphone with a winning smile. "Thank you, Mother, for those generous words," he started, his deep voice rolling over the audience. "And thank you to my esteemed colleagues and friends here tonight. Looking out at this magnificent ballroom, I am reminded of what makes Atlanta so uniquely powerful. We are a city of kings and queens. We build empires and we protect them at all costs." He paused, letting the heavy applause wash over him. The commercial real estate market has been highly volatile this year. Many developers have crumbled completely under the extreme pressure of rising interest rates. But while others panicked, my investment firm saw an unparalleled opportunity for aggressive expansion. Tonight, I am profoundly proud to announce that the Vance family portfolio has officially finalized the sole acquisition of the crown jewel of this city, the Midtown Plaza. A massive wave of shocked, impressed murmurs swept through the 500 guests. The Midtown Plaza was the most coveted commercial development in the state, and everyone in the room knew it was valued at nearly $1 billion. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the balcony, watching my husband confidently claim total ownership of the exact architectural masterpiece I had spent 5 agonizing years building from scratch. I was blatantly stealing my professional glory in front of the entire city. This monumental acquisition positions our firm at the absolute pinnacle of the commercial sector, Julian boasted, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. We have secured the institutional funding. We have finalized the structural deeds. The Midtown Plaza now belongs entirely to the Vance legacy. Julian shifted his weight at the podium, his handsome face dropping the charming smile and adopting a mask of somber faux regret. However, he continued, his tone dropping an octave. Stepping into a new era of unprecedented prosperity requires us to make some very difficult personal decisions. You cannot build a massive skyscraper on a fundamentally broken foundation, and you cannot carry dead weight into a billion-dollar future. The ballroom grew incredibly quiet. The guests could sense the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The celebratory mood was instantly replaced by thick, palpable tension. "For the past 4 years, I have tried to lift someone up to our level," Julian said, staring out into the sea of faces. "I brought a woman from the absolute bottom of society into my home. I gave her my prestigious name. I funded her little business ventures. I tried to teach her how to operate in our elite world. But you simply cannot force elegance onto someone who fundamentally belongs on the streets. My wife Maya has proven to be financially erratic, emotionally unstable, and entirely unfit to carry the Vance name." Gasps echoed loudly across the grand ballroom. High society wives covered their mouths with their hands while wealthy executives exchanged wide-eyed glances. Publicly announcing a divorce at a charity gala was a brutal, unprecedented violation of social etiquette. Therefore, Julian declared, his voice ringing with cruel authority, "I am formally announcing my divorce from Maya Vance effective immediately. The legal paperwork was filed this afternoon. She will not be receiving a single dime of this new commercial acquisition. Maya, if you are sitting back there by the kitchen doors, I suggest you call a cheap taxi. You need to find your own way home tonight because your free ride on my family's legacy is officially over." He did not even wait for the collective shock of the crowd to settle before twisting the knife even deeper. He gestured grandly toward the front row. "But every king needs a true queen, someone with the grace, intellect, and loyalty to help him rule. I want to introduce you all to the brilliant woman who has been standing by my side navigating this massive corporate acquisition. My future. Sasha, please come up here." Sasha stood up from the front table, beaming with triumphant joy. Her tight silver dress caught the spotlight as she eagerly climbed the stage stairs and took her place right beside Julian. He wrapped his arm tightly around her waist, pulling her close. Beatrice stood on his other side, clapping her hands together with visible delight. The three of them stood under the bright stage lights, a twisted portrait of stolen wealth and shameless betrayal. The 500 guests were paralyzed in stunned silence. No one knew whether to clap or look away from the sheer brutality of the public humiliation. They were all waiting for the discarded, unstable wife to run crying out the back doors. They were waiting for me to break. I did not run. I did not cry. I reached over to the high cocktail table and picked up a crystal champagne flute. I grabbed a heavy silver stirring spoon from the bar setup. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, piercing sound of silver striking crystal cut cleanly through the heavy silence of the massive ballroom. Every single head in the room whipped around simultaneously, tracing the sound up to the elevated VIP viewing gallery. I stepped out of the dark shadows and into the cascading light of the grand crystal chandeliers. The moment the crowd saw me, a collective shockwave physically rocked the room. I was not wearing the modest conservative suit of a defeated wife. I was wearing a custom breathtaking emerald green gown that swept majestically against the floor. The heavy, flawless diamonds wrapped around my neck caught the ambient light and refracted it into a blinding halo of absolute power. I looked like a ruthless, conquering goddess, stepping onto a battlefield. I slowly descended the plush-carpeted staircase. The crowd of elite politicians and wealthy executives instantly parted down the middle, clearing a wide, unobstructed path for me. They stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, sensing the lethal, unyielding energy radiating from my every step. I did not look at any of them. I kept my gaze locked squarely on the stage. Julian's smug, victorious smile completely vanished the second he saw me. The color drained so rapidly from his face, he looked like a corpse. Beatrice stumbled backward, gripping the acrylic podium to keep from collapsing. Sasha's triumphant grin melted into an expression of pure, unadulterated panic as she took in the sheer, overwhelming dominance of my appearance. I glided effortlessly down the center aisle, the emerald silk of my train rustling softly against the carpet. I reached the stage stairs and ascended them with slow, deliberate grace. Julian was literally trembling as I approached the podium. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing too late that he had walked blindly into a slaughterhouse. I stopped directly in front of him. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink in his face. I simply reached out and firmly pulled the microphone right out of his shaking hand. I turned to face the 500 silent, breathless guests. "Thank you, Julian, for that beautiful introduction," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and ringing with absolute icy authority across the massive ballroom. "Now let us talk about who is actually paying for this microphone." Beatrice practically floated to the acrylic podium, ensuring the bright overhead spotlight caught the massive vintage diamonds resting heavily against her collarbone before she formally yielded the floor to her son. She looked over the sea of influential faces, her expression a carefully curated mask of maternal pride and aristocratic sorrow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice began, her voice echoing flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Welcome to the 40th Annual Legacy Foundation Gala. We gather tonight in Atlanta, not just to celebrate charity, but to honor the enduring strength of our shared heritage. For generations, families like mine have stood as unyielding pillars of this great city. We have weathered economic storms. We have maintained our impeccable standards and our absolute commitment to preserving the wealth our ancestors built for us." She paused, dabbing the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief. The elite crowd offered a soft murmur of sympathetic applause, completely captivated by her theatrical performance. But preserving a legacy is not an easy task. Beatrice continued, her tone shifting from sorrowful to razor-sharp. It requires ruthless dedication. It requires knowing exactly who truly belongs in our sacred inner circle and who is merely an opportunist looking for a free ride on our coattails. Recently, my family faced a significant internal challenge. We were severely tested by outside forces that sought to drain our resources and tarnish our good name. But a true Vance never surrenders to mediocrity. She extended her arm dramatically toward the edge of the stage. Tonight, I present the man who fought tirelessly to secure our family's financial supremacy. He is a brilliant investment banker, a devoted father, and the undisputed savior of the Vance family legacy. Please raise your crystal glasses and warmly welcome my remarkable son, Julian Vance. The grand ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The elite crowd, completely oblivious to the massive financial fraud Julian was currently committing, stood up to cheer for their golden boy. From my elevated vantage point in the darkened VIP viewing gallery, I watched Julian swagger onto the stage. I was soaking up the unearned adoration like a starving man. He kissed his mother affectionately on the cheek and took his rightful place behind the podium, adjusting his custom velvet tuxedo jacket. Julian gripped the sides of the acrylic podium, leaning into the microphone with a winning, charismatic smile. "Thank you, Mother, for those incredibly generous words." He started, his deep voice rolling smoothly over the captive audience. "And thank you to my esteemed colleagues, business partners, and lifelong friends here tonight." Looking out at this magnificent ballroom, I am sharply reminded of what makes Atlanta so uniquely powerful. We are a city of self-made kings and legacy queens. We build massive commercial empires and we protect them at absolutely all costs. He paused, letting the heavy wave of applause wash over him. He was playing the crowd perfectly, appealing to their shared sense of elite superiority. "The commercial real estate market has been highly volatile this year," Julian announced, adopting a serious business persona. "Many established developers have crumbled completely under the extreme pressure of rising interest rates and supply chain failures. But while other firms panicked and folded, my investment firm saw an unparalleled opportunity for aggressive market expansion. Tonight, I am profoundly proud to announce to this room that the Vance family portfolio has officially finalized the sole acquisition of the absolute crown jewel of this city, the Midtown Plaza." A massive wave of shocked, highly impressed murmurs swept rapidly through the 500 guests. The Midtown Plaza was the most coveted commercial development in the entire state of Georgia, and everyone in the room knew it was currently valued at nearly $1 billion. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the balcony, watching my arrogant husband confidently claim total ownership of the exact architectural masterpiece I had spent 5 agonizing years building from dirt. I was blatantly stealing my professional glory in front of the entire city. I had negotiated the brutal zoning laws. I had secured the complex construction permits. I had poured my own sweat and blood into that concrete, and Julian was standing there taking the credit for a round of cheap applause. This monumental acquisition securely positions our financial firm at the absolute pinnacle of the commercial sector. Julian boasted, his chest puffed out with arrogant, sickening pride. "We have successfully secured the institutional funding. We have finalized the structural deeds. The Midtown Plaza now belongs entirely to the Vance legacy." Julian shifted his weight at the podium, his handsome face dropping the charming smile and adopting a mask of somber faux regret. However, he continued, his tone dropping a dramatic octave. "Stepping into a new era of unprecedented prosperity requires us to make some very difficult, highly personal decisions. You simply cannot build a massive skyscraper on a fundamentally broken foundation. And you absolutely cannot carry dead weight into a billion-dollar future." The massive ballroom grew incredibly quiet. The wealthy guests could instantly sense the sudden bizarre shift in the atmosphere. The celebratory, charitable mood was instantly replaced by thick, palpable tension. Politicians lowered their drinks. Real estate moguls exchanged confused side glances. "For the past 4 years, I have tried my absolute best to lift someone up to our elevated level," Julian said, staring directly out into the sea of bewildered faces. I brought a woman from the absolute bottom of society into my pristine home. I gave her my prestigious family name. I funded her little business ventures. I tried tirelessly to teach her how to operate gracefully in our elite world. But you simply cannot force elegance onto someone who fundamentally belongs on the dirty streets. My wife Maya has proven to be financially erratic, emotionally unstable, and entirely unfit to carry the historic Vance name. Loud gasps echoed sharply across the grand ballroom. High society wives covered their perfectly painted mouths with their hands in sheer horror. Publicly announcing a vicious divorce at a formal charity gala was a brutal, unprecedented violation of unspoken social etiquette. It was a spectacular display of tasteless cruelty. Therefore, Julian declared, his voice ringing with cruel, absolute authority. I am formally announcing my divorce from Maya Vance effective immediately. The legal paperwork was filed by my attorneys this afternoon. She will not be receiving a single dime of this new commercial acquisition. Maya, if you are sitting back there by the kitchen doors where you belong, I suggest you call a cheap taxi. You need to find your own way home tonight, because your free ride on my family's legacy is officially over. He did not even wait for the collective shock of the crowd to settle before twisting the rusty knife even deeper into the wound. He gestured grandly toward the front row VIP tables. But every reigning king needs a true loyal queen by his side, someone with the inherent grace, intellect, and loyalty to help him rule his empire. I want to introduce you all to the brilliant, beautiful woman who has been standing steadfastly by my side, navigating this massive corporate acquisition, my future. Sasha, please come up here. Sasha stood up eagerly from the front table, beaming with triumphant, vindictive joy. Her tight silver dress caught the bright spotlight as she quickly climbed the stage stairs and took her place right beside Julian. He wrapped his arm tightly around her waist, pulling her close for the cameras. Beatrice stood on his other side, clapping her hands together with visible, unhinged delight. The three of them stood under the bright stage lights, presenting a twisted, grotesque portrait of stolen wealth and shameless public betrayal. The 500 guests were completely paralyzed in stunned, horrified silence. No one knew whether to politely clap or look away from the sheer brutality of the public humiliation. They were all waiting for the discarded, unstable wife to run crying hysterically out the back doors. They were waiting for the poor foster kid to break under the immense, crushing weight of the black elite's rejection. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not break. I reached over to the high-top cocktail table and picked up a heavy crystal champagne flute. I grabbed a solid silver stirring spoon from the adjacent bar setup. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, piercing sound of silver striking heavy crystal cut cleanly and violently through the heavy, suffocating silence of the massive ballroom. Every single head in the room whipped around simultaneously, tracing the ringing sound up to the elevated VIP viewing gallery. I stepped out of the dark shadows and directly into the cascading, brilliant light of the grand crystal chandeliers. The moment the crowd saw me, a collective physical shockwave rocked the entire room. I was not wearing the modest, conservative suit of a defeated, broken wife. I was wearing a custom, breathtaking emerald green silk gown that swept majestically against the floor. The heavy, flawless victory diamonds wrapped tightly around my neck caught the ambient room light and refracted it into a blinding halo of absolute, terrifying power. I looked like a ruthless, conquering goddess stepping onto a bloody battlefield. I slowly descended the plush, carpeted staircase. The massive crowd of elite politicians and wealthy executives instantly parted down the middle, clearing a wide, unobstructed path for me. They stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, sensing the lethal, unyielding energy radiating furiously from my every step. The rustle of my silk train sounded like a drawn sword. I did not look at any of the guests. I kept my blazing gaze locked squarely on the stage. Julian's smug, victorious smile completely vanished the precise second he saw me. The color drained so rapidly from his face he looked like a panicked ghost. Beatrice stumbled backward, gripping the acrylic podium with her manicured hands to keep from physically collapsing. Sasha's triumphant, arrogant grin melted into an expression of pure, unadulterated panic as she took in the sheer, overwhelming dominance of my regal appearance. I glided effortlessly down the center aisle, maintaining total eye contact with the man who thought he could bury me. I reached the stage stairs and ascended them with slow, deliberate, predatory grace. Julian was literally trembling as I approached the podium. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing entirely too late that he had walked blindly into a slaughterhouse. I stopped directly in front of him. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink in his face. I simply reached out and firmly pulled the microphone right out of his shaking, sweating hand. I turned my back to him and faced the 500 silent, breathless guests. "Thank you, Julian, for that beautiful introduction," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and ringing with absolute icy authority across the massive ballroom. "Now let us talk about who is actually paying for this microphone." I snapped my fingers sharply. The massive high-definition projector screens behind the stage instantly flickered. The elegant gold-embossed Vance family crest vanished completely. In its place, a series of highly classified financial documents illuminated the grand ballroom. The crowd gasped collectively as Julian's forged bank transfers appeared in stark, undeniable clarity. The screen displayed the exact $2.5 million wire fraud he committed that very morning using my forged digital signature. Next came the brutal foreclosure notices for Sasha's luxury condo. Finally, the centerpiece of his absolute destruction materialized. It was his massive $5 million private debt portfolio. At the bottom of the glowing document, under the bold heading of primary legal creditor, my name was prominently listed. I turned to look directly at Beatrice and Chloe, who were practically hyperventilating near the front table. "You told me to pay the $150,000 invoice for this ballroom," I stated, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I decided it was significantly cheaper to just buy the entire hotel. You are currently standing on my personal property." Sasha let out a loud, humiliated sob and literally ran off the stage, pushing through the bewildered crowd toward the exit. I looked back at my husband, who was completely frozen in a state of absolute terror. "Your mistress has no home, Julian," I announced coldly. "I foreclosed on her condo this afternoon. Your son has no vehicles because I had them repossessed, and you are utterly bankrupt because I bought your entire mountain of debt for pennies on the dollar. This family did not build a legacy. They stole mine. And tonight I am taking it back." The sheer public humiliation finally broke whatever fragile grip Julian had left on his sanity. He let out a feral, unhinged scream and lunged across the stage directly at me, his hands outstretched like claws. He never even made it within 3 feet of my emerald gown. The two armed private security guards Marcus had stationed nearby tackled my husband violently to the polished hardwood floor. Julian slammed onto the stage, kicking and thrashing in his ruined custom tuxedo. Right on cue, the distinct piercing wail of police sirens pierced the thick tension of the ballroom. The heavy oak doors at the back of the venue burst open. Atlanta police officers, flanked by 2 federal agents, marched straight down the center aisle. Elias had forwarded the undeniable proof of the multi-million-dollar wire fraud directly to the authorities the second the funds cleared the Cayman Islands account. The officers hauled Julian roughly to his feet, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping cold, heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Beatrice screamed hysterically, reaching out for her golden boy as they dragged him away in front of the entire stunned Atlanta high society. The elite legacy he worshipped had just watched him get hauled off like a common street criminal. The fallout over the next few months was absolutely biblical. The proud, arrogant Vance family was utterly obliterated from the Atlanta social registry. Beatrice faced immediate intense public backlash for her direct complicity in the financial fraud. She was permanently stripped of her prestigious sorority affiliations and formally banned from every elite country club south of Peachtree Street. Without Julian's stolen money to fund her lavish lifestyle, she was swiftly evicted from her massive estate. The former queen of Buckhead society was forced to move into a tiny rundown one-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood, completely abandoned by the wealthy friends she used to desperately impress. She had to deeply learn exactly how to barely survive without any loyal servants or endless generational wealth protecting her. Chloe suffered an equally brutal descent into reality. Her luxury cars were repossessed, and her credit was entirely destroyed. I saw her once a few weeks later while I was inspecting a new retail property. The girl who used to mock my self-made wealth was wearing a cheap polyester uniform, working a minimum wage retail job at a discount department store. She avoided my gaze completely, keeping her head bowed in profound, absolute shame as she quietly restocked the dusty shelves. Elias moved with lethal efficiency through the family court system. The divorce proceedings were swift and merciless. Because of the documented felony wire fraud and the ironclad clauses in our prenuptial agreement, the judge awarded me total, absolute victory. I kept 100% of my real estate empire. Furthermore, the court allowed me to legally absorb every single one of Julian's remaining liquid assets to cover the massive debts he owed me. He was left with absolutely nothing but a lengthy prison sentence and a forever ruined legacy. His aristocratic family name was now entirely synonymous with corporate theft and spectacular public disgrace. I stood proudly on the expansive glass balcony of my newest commercial skyscraper. The crisp morning wind whipped around me as I looked out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. I had designed this specific building from the ground up, pouring my ambition and immense resilience into every single steel beam and concrete pillar. It was currently the tallest commercial structure in the financial district, a towering, beautiful monument to ultimate self-made power. My phone buzzed softly in the pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an automated notification from my primary corporate bank. The massive multi-million-dollar deposit from my latest international commercial acquisition had successfully cleared the final holding phase. The account balance reflected a staggering number that guaranteed my absolute independence for the rest of my natural life. No one would ever try to control me again. I smiled, letting the warm Georgia sun wash over my face. I took a slow, appreciative sip of my perfectly brewed black coffee. I walked into the bakery and bought a $9 muffin without a single care in the world.